Today we'll be talking to a CIO that's highly accomplished and got many accolades and was instrumental in driving the digital marketing and transformation of Domino's Pizza. We'll be sitting down with Wayne McMahon. We hope you enjoy the chat.
You're listening to the Westech podcast, powered by West Recruitment.
Let's go! Yes, check the Westech podcast.
Yeah, sitting here today with Wayne McMahon, going to talk us through his career journey. Wayne, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Pleasure. I'm well.
Excellent, excellent. So for those that don't know you or haven't crossed paths with you yet, do you want to tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm currently the CTO for a large group of companies called Questas Group. We have about 16 operating businesses around Australia. Mm-hmm. I've been in my current role for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was the CIO of Pizza Hut Australia. I was in that role for, again, about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I did about 13 months with Hungry Jack's, and prior to that, for 7.5 years, I was the global CIO for Domino's Pizza Enterprises. And for completion, prior to that, I was the CIO for Super Retail Group, or Super Cheap Auto Group, as it was called in those days.
So three well-known businesses in Australia, definitely, obviously with a global presence. Businesses have gone through a lot of change, which I think is going to be fantastic, and we're going to talk through your time with those businesses.
Yeah.
But more in terms of your career journey, how did IT come about for you?
It's what I did straight out of uni. So I literally went to on-campus interviews in my last session at uni, at Wollongong Uni, and I was recruited by Grace Brothers. For the young ones out there, that was what Myers was called prior to being called Myers. And I was recruited by Grace Brothers to do point-of-sale implementation when they were converting from tills to registers over to point-of-sale software.
So it was IT was only ever the career option you were considering?
The only thing I've ever done. I think it's probably the only thing I'm good at. So yeah,
I
fell on my feet. Yeah, but even at uni, I mean, I studied economics, but I studied business computing as well. So,
and what was the landscape in IT for a career at the time? Was it something that was really hard to break into, or?
Well, this was the late '80s, so the IT industry was in its absolute infancy, right? Yeah, and it was small. It didn't have the profile that it has today. There was no such concept of a C-level role in IT. We tended to report into like CFOs. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even called information technology in those days. It was called either data processing or I think information services.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a very it was great in many ways because it was small. People kind of knew each other. I remember when, back in the late 80s, early 90s, the Royal Oak Hotel in Balmain, pretty much, I'd say a majority of people that work in the computer industry or whatever we call it in those days used to congregate there on a Saturday. It was a place to go. You could pick up a contract. You could, catch up with people you used to work with. Yeah, it was smaller and in many ways, I suppose, more personable.
If you look at the industry today and how big it is and how integrated it is, it's a backbone of every business. To see from there to here it is now, I mean, it must have been a journey at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel I'm very fortunate to have been part of it and watch it evolve and be part of that evolution.
And going back to your career, when you were in the industry, obviously it was in its infancy, was there an area that you wanted to specialise or move towards at the time, or?
I was naturally always a developer.
Okay.
And, I did languages as part of my university degree. So I always tended towards, early on, I tended towards roles that involved some level of development. And then eventually I sort of moved into roles that were full-time development.
Right. And were you someone that was more interested in the work, or from a career standpoint, did you view it as, okay, I really want to advance my career? And quite driven and ambitious to move up the ladder, or is it just like, I just want to do interesting work?
That's interesting. I wished I could say that I had, a grand plan, and that I'd worked it out and that I followed it, all the way through and, ended up in successful C-level roles, but I didn't. I had some basic aspirations, but really my whole career has just been really based around opportunities that come my way and, running with it. deciding what was a good opportunity and what wasn't, and then going for it. So yeah, I had some basic aspirations. I remember I wanted to move into management at some point, which I did do. I stepped into an IT management role for Dell, for the start of Dell's operations in Australia. I was the IT manager for that startup. That was my first step into, a management role.
And was that because you just liked the people aspect of the industry?
I just felt that, I would make a good manager.
Okay.
So I had that as an aspiration. I wanted to work overseas, and I particularly wanted to be based in Asia. I wanted to spend a lot of time in Asia, which I was able to do. And at some point in my career, I wanted to reach sort of sea level. But they were only just, again, they were just...
quite loose, weren't they?
Yeah, they were loose. They were aspirations, There was no real planning involved. It's just I was lucky. Opportunities came my way and one led to another. So, I stepped into an IT management role. I left Dell, went to another company. That company was an insurance company, and then they sold the book, meaning that there was a small boutique sort of insurance company, meaning that we're all basically retrenched. And then I went to work for an American multinational for their start of operations in Australia as an IT manager. Within 9 months, I'd been recognised as somebody that they wanted to move to Asia, so I was able to move to Asia. And I worked for that company for 11 years. I was based in Singapore for most of that time, for 8 years. But I spent a couple of years in Tokyo with them.
That would have been really interesting. What was the IT landscape like in terms of as someone in the industry compared to Australia? Were we behind or?
No, I think if anything, probably more advanced. I mean, Singapore was as advanced as Australia, but then when we went into China, I mean, that was not. Taiwan the same. Even Japan, when I went there, from a technology perspective, I felt that Australia, Singapore was more advanced than Japan. They were still using a lot of sort of old school systems when I went there, which is the reason that they put me in there. Yeah. These days we would have called it a digital transformation, but in those days they sent me into Japan basically to re-engineer their IT. Whereas the American company felt that they in what they had wasn't adequate. Yeah.
And to sort of go back to leadership, obviously it's good to be an aspirational manager. Did you have any mentors or people in your career that you sort of molded your style after or really enjoyed working with that helped you, or?
Not really, no. I mean, in fact, to be honest, I had some dreadful CIOs when I was, probably they were the anti-mentor. It was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be like that.
So in a way, you molded your style on what you didn't want to be.
The opposite, yeah. I had some great, I had a really great president of Asia for 11 years. I was with the American multinational, guy called Ken Sutherland, and we really pushed the envelope because we were part of, as I say, American multinational, but the work was increasingly moving to Asia. It was IT company. It was a supply chain company to high-tech manufacturing and IT companies, Microsoft, Sun Microsystems, and all of that work was moving to Asia. So we'd gone from kind of the smallest region to being probably the most important region as the work came across. Increasingly, those businesses wanted their supply chains to be centered around Asia because of the cost factor. So yeah, it was great working for Ken. It was more of a great working relationship, and as we evolved our region within that business, and of course, I've worked for some other great CEOs. I mean, Don May.
Yep, Domino.
As we know, Don
very
May,
high profile, was in the ad.
Visionary, yeah. I mean, visionary. He had some fabulous ideas. I worked for Jack Cowan for the 13 months when I was at Hungry Jack's. Yep. I mean, that was interesting in itself. Yeah. So I've had some great people around me, but yeah, I mean, the CIOs I've worked for, bit of a mixed bunch, really.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because you hear some experience that people in those roles, because they're great with people and that's their strength, like they're more around the softer skills. And then you've got others that are really not people, but they're very technical and they know the business really well. So there's, it's very hard to try and sort of pinpoint which works best for an organisation or which is most effective. But
True.
yeah, if you can have both, I think you're winning. Tell us about your leadership style. How would you describe that?
I'm probably the worst person to try and describe that. Well, I mean, I'm very open with my people. I try to be as transparent as I can. We're collaborative in decisions that we make.
Okay.
We have a lot of very open and frank discussion. I'm happy to make the call when a call needs to be made, and that's a natural part of business. But I make sure that even if I have to make the call, and it may be a call that is not exactly in line with one of my people, I'll spend the time with them to get them comfortable with it. I'm very driven in delivering for the business, so I'm a very accountable guy. So if I make a commitment to a CEO or to the board, come hell or high water, I'll deliver on that commitment. And that probably comes from having high profile roles in like Domino's, where you lived or died by your ability to deliver. And we were delivering like 200 upwards of 200 digital projects a year, so
which is an insane amount.
And the fact is you delivered. Not delivering was not even a question.
Well, it was funny because I think you did get a lot of recognition for that by the way of accolades. Obviously you were 2013 and 2016 Retail CIO of the Year.
So true, yeah.
You also were second place in CIO 50 for most innovative CIOs, and that was 2016 as well. I think if you look at
that must have been my peak.
That was your path. I think it was more your work was so widely known, and I think everybody that so you look at something like the pizza industry and Domino's.
Yeah.
I have to admit that was my first job, was Domino's with
kitchen.
But I mean, I think you look at an industry that you think about disruption. Like pizzas haven't changed in hundreds of years. I think even in Pompeii they were digging out, pizza shops and things. They found there was tops. Yeah. But how did you bring innovation? Lift Domino's. I mean, obviously what you did there, some of the technologies.
Yeah, I was brought in to do it. I mean, it was simple as that.
So what was the remit when you got the job? They said, look, this is the state of play at the moment. People still calling in to get pizzas or?
Yeah, I mean, I went through a lengthy interview process, and the final interview was Don May himself. And I remember Don slid his iPhone across the table and said to me, "That's the future." He said, "I want to put all of our digital in people's hands. I want to put it, I want everything on that app."
So this was about what, 2011?
Yeah, 2011.
So you think about iPhones were around, but to go on the internet off your iPhone was still a pretty sketchy experience, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, and and I guess that was the whole thing in the what we call the QSR industry, quick service restaurant, or you would call it fast food. Innovation, having great customer experiences, digital experiences, wasn't the thing. And that's where Domino's really, really shined, because we were the third largest in Australia. Pizza Hut were the dominant, and Eagle Boys was second, and then we were last in the top three. Right, we were the third, and we didn't have the stores, the footprint to beat Pizza Hut. And Eagle Boys had like a very, very strong following, especially with the demographic for pizza, which is predominantly males, and the sort of young males, teen through mid-20s. Eagle Boys was really, really popular with them. So we felt the best way, and Don believed this strongly, which is why he brought me into the business, but the best way for us to dominate the market was to completely disrupt it. And we couldn't open enough stores to disrupt it that way. That would, stores are expensive to open. So we disrupted it through technology. And that's what he brought me in to do. So then, we drove the digital experiences. You know, when I went there, their online ordering was very basic. It was actually written in Flash. Can you believe it? If you remember Macromedia Flash, you would literally download a Flash file, and then you would order off that, and all the logic and everything was in that Flash file. So it was very basic, and then we moved to, you know, building a proper e-commerce back end, and then we had the, you know, the app and the iPad, and then a proper website, a responsive website. So we literally started going through and building interfaces or you know, customer experiences. And
what was, sorry, just on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's once you've had the plan, you knew, okay, this is what we can do. How did you know it was possible at the time? Was that something that you had to go and research, or did Don go, in my head, I think this is what would be, and you don't feel it?
No, I mean, as a technologist, I knew it was possible. I mean, anything was better than Flash.
So the bar was pretty low.
Well, it was a starting point. Put it that way. It was a starting point. So, I mean, yeah, I you know, building a proper website, building apps was a thing. iPad, you know, had recently come out and was popular. So building, you know, with an iPad, you had a larger screen to work with. So we knew that we could put a lot more wow factor into an iPad app than we could into an iPhone app. So yeah, I mean, we knew that it was possible. It was just a case of harnessing the resources, building the team, and cracking on. And
tell me about some of the best projects that had the most impact at the time when you were doing this uplift.
I wouldn't. Where do you start? I mean, we did some great things. I mean, we built some great apps. I mean, probably the most interesting was the Pizza Mogul initiative, but that was later on. I think that was 2015, 2016.
You're listening to West Talks Tech, where we give you a recruiter's insights into our world, with the aim of helping you reach your career or hiring goals. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Check the West Tech Podcast.
So the Pizza Mogul, for those that haven't heard of it, is that the one where you can create your own top?
Yeah, people could create their own signature pizzas. They could then create their own media to sell their own pizza, upload their media. And we built, like, you know, basically our own kind of social network where people could have their own kind of place, their own videos. And if any of their signature pizzas sold, they would get a commission. So they would get, you know, I can't remember what it was, 20, 30, 40, 50 cents a pizza if their pizza sold. But there was significant technology to deliver that. It was a multi-million-dollar project, and we didn't have very long. And you know, we not only had to build the user experience to be able to build your signature pizzas, we had to build the equivalent of a social media environment. We had to build the whole media, managing people's media uploads. We had software that automatically went through and checked for skin-colored pixels to make sure that, you know, to
keep it looking sharp.
Yeah, to edit them to make sure there was nothing inappropriate going up there.
Yep.
And then, you know, there was a huge back-end requirement around, because people earned what we called pizza dough, or I think it might have been Domino's dough, and you got one dough equaled $1, so you could convert it later and withdraw it as cash.
Wow.
So we had a whole back end requirement for that. So that was important for the size of it and all of the elements that went into that.
But you look at innovation, that is at the tip of the spear for innovation, especially for that industry.
But
nobody's heard of that.
But probably for me personally, the most important innovation for us was the GPS tracking of the order, because we were the first QSR to do it. And Don May and I got the idea from catching an Uber in the States. You know, and this is when Uber were just ride shares before they were doing food. And you know, they were famous for having an app, and you could watch the Uber come to you and pick you up. And we're watching an Uber come, and we sort of had a light bulb moment. And then in that Uber on the way back to the hotel, we're over in Silicon Valley. We were visiting Twitter, I think, at the time.
Right.
And in the ride on the way back, we sort of said, could we do that? And I said, yeah, we could do that. And we should do that, because at the time, our pizza tracker, when it went to the point where the pizza left the store, it only just worked on averages. So the delivery bit was on averages. It wasn't real, it was averages. So we replaced that with real GPS tracking. And yeah, we worked with a company, Nabman, to do that. And we put that in place. And yeah, that's something nowadays that you take for granted, but in those days that was to track that last few kilometers of the delivery in actual time was massive.
I can imagine your customer complaints around pizza delivery. Oh, where's my pizza? If it's a minute late, I can still see it. So all of that would have probably been removed just by default.
Well, it gave back time. This is the whole thing. It gave people back time. You didn't have to think, when is the guy going to knock on the door with my pizza? You knew when the guy was going to knock on the door. So you could put the kids in the bath, or you could, quickly walk the dog, or do whatever you wanted to do.
Yep.
Have a quick shower or whatever before that pizza arrived, because you knew when it was going to arrive. Whereas prior to that, you never really knew. It could be 10 minutes, could be half an hour. You had no idea.
Yeah.
So it gave back time.
Yeah. I know from a marketing standpoint, it looks sharp. Even I think there was an advertising for AI looking at your pizza when it came out of the oven to ensure that
that was a different thing.
Yeah, so that's AI before really AI was taking off. It was like, it's always been seen as something very cool and new and different.
Yeah. Well, we did back in the day. We did a couple of things with AI before AI was it was talked about, but not it's commonplace today. And even myself as a developer, everything I do now, I find some way to integrate AI into it. Yeah. But in those days, AI was new, and we did two things. One was we did an interactive chat that where you could chat with a chat bot that had AI behind it, an order, and you could either chat with text or you could speak to it. And the other thing was the checking of the order as it came out of the oven, and checking that back against the original order. So make sure that, if you said no mushroom, that there was no mushroom. If you said add mushroom, that there was mushroom.
Yep.
So yeah, we did. We that was the other thing that we did.
And how did that affect sales once all this was done?
To be honest, that was around when that went live, was around the time I left. So I don't really know.
But even with the delivery app and the platform where you can order through your mobile, obviously that's changed the trajectory of that business massively. And I don't even think Eagle Boys is around anymore.
Well, Eagle Boys died. Yeah. They went bankrupt.
Do you think that had something to do with the fact that Domino's?
Sorry, I don't know if they went bankrupt so much as they just wound up. But basically they stopped. And it wasn't long before Domino's absolutely dominated Pizza Hut, right, and rose to be number one.
Which I think at the time when you set out, that was almost unthinkable, just because the footprint wasn't the same size.
Well, that's what we set out to do, to become number one. And we got there with innovation, with technology. And so, in that respect, we were highly successful. So from I think 2011, when I joined, we were number 3. By 2015, we were number 1.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now you ended up going over to Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I ended up meeting the guys from Allegro Funds, the PE company, and Pizza Hut was part of their portfolio. And I had left Hungry Jack's, or Competitive Foods. I'd left Competitive Foods, Jack Cowan's company, and I had a breakfast meeting with one of the founders from Allegro Funds, and they were keen to hire me, and of course they naturally put me into Pizza Hut, because at the time Pizza Hut was not what they wanted it to be. So we set about putting all new digital ordering in place, and putting in place proper digital marketing, and we were able to get Pizza Hut to the point where it had like for like sales increased month on month for, I think, 42 months or something when I left. And they were still getting upside. Yeah. So, I mean, they never ever became as big as Domino's in Australia, but they became certainly bigger than what they were.
Right. Yeah.
And we had that continuous like for like growth each month.
What did you do differently when you took that role on at Pizza Hut?
Well, it was good because I had a fresh sheet of paper from a technology perspective. So, I wanted to put innovation in place, but I was lucky enough to say I could effectively start from the beginning. Whereas, in Domino's, you got to a point where you were building significant tech debt with the amount of deliveries that we're doing, whereas I had a clean slate. So, I understood what good ordering solutions should look like. I understood what functions people wanted, what functions weren't really, a hit with customers. I knew GPS tracking was an absolute must, but rather than build it as we did at Domino's with Navman, we actually partnered with a company out of Israel who were able to deliver that for us. And so, that allowed us to shortcut a lot of the delivery, if you could buy it rather than build it. So, I mean, I guess I learned from, some of the mistakes, or rather not mistakes, some of the realities, I guess you'd say, of what I've done elsewhere, and be more, I suppose, cleverer in the way that I did it at Pizza Hut.
So more refined.
Yeah.
Did any of your prior roles, when innovation was on the agenda and you had to drive that and there's a lot of change, did you encounter a lot of pushback or people that were really like resistant or just didn't think it would work, or
I think both Domino's and Pizza Hut, from a corporate perspective, from an executive perspective, we're all very aligned. In Domino's, you had to be aligned. Don May used to refer to it as a speeding bullet train. You're either on the train or you weren't. So, everybody got behind everything that we were doing. But in both instances, probably it was more the franchise community, because, the franchise community had to contribute towards the running costs of these solutions. So they needed a lot more convincing.
It's a different dynamic when it's people's money, a mum and dad business and investing. And
yeah. And they're going, okay, well, we're contributing to this. Well, what's the ROI for me in my business? So there was a lot more, there was a lot of effort needed to be put into that to sell the dream.
Hindsight's 2020 though now, isn't it? Obviously, I'm sure they've done very well out of it. What you were able to deliver.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Some would say they've done very, very well out of it. Some perhaps not, but that's franchising.
Absolutely. Which of your roles, I think, from your own perspective, were you most satisfied with? Like you had the most enjoyment from?
I think obviously the Domino's role, because by the time I left Domino's, and I was invited by Jack Cowan to come and join his business. He was also the chairman of the board. I really felt that, because it was 7.5 years, I really felt that I'd achieved a lot and I'd done a lot and I'd put a lot into it. So, I felt there was really nothing more that I could give. So that would be probably the third one.
What was your remit going into Hungry Jack's?
It's just that they were behind.
Right.
They had no digital ordering. They had no home delivery. And so, I said about putting that in place. So we put digital ordering into the market.
Yep.
And I worked with Menulog on a partnership, and as we had home delivery. At the time, it's strange. I think at the time, because they were very much a bricks and mortar business. They didn't really see the sense of it. And I left, but then, well, 18 months or so later, we had a thing called COVID. All of a sudden, having digital ordering and having home delivery became crucial.
Absolutely.
So
Wow.
I think that probably solidified it for people.
I think within that industry especially, I think convenience used to be drive-through, and now it's I want it on my lounge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they were focused on drive-through. They were bricks and mortar business. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Whereas you could absolutely argue that Domino's was a digital business, and the stores were really only there for fulfillment.
I think if you looking at the amount of transformation and innovation work that you've done, I think you now know what good looks like. I mean, from a perspective, was there any projects that you went really, really well, and maybe some that didn't go so well that you could probably sort of go, okay, I could pinpoint where that maybe went south?
Well, God, there's been so many of them. Pretty much all of the major projects have gone well. I can honestly say that. I've no major disappointments. So in fact, I'm very proud of a lot of the projects we've done. And even, in the last 3.5 years at Questas, I went there. Allegro Funds after Pizza Hut put me into Questas because it was another portfolio company. And, I went there and they were very, very backward. It was like the 90s,
Yeah.
all over again. And, I've driven a digital transformation there and it's gone extremely well.
Is it good governance? Is it getting people on board? Is it the right vendors? I mean, obviously it's a combination of everything, but you look statistically, nearly half of all IT projects aren't successful or don't meet what they were originally set out to. With such a high fail rate, obviously such a significant investment, how do you manage to keep getting it right? Like, what's your process?
I think it's a mixture. I think, first of all, you've got to run your basics, right? You've got to have a sensible objective. You've got to have, it's got to be technically feasible. You've got to have funding. You've got to have the team. You've absolutely got to have the business on board. You've got to communicate it well. You've got to run a solid project. I mean, there's no getting around that. It has to be a well-managed project. It has to be a successful technology delivery, but more than that, it has to be a successful business delivery.
And how do you sometimes separate the
So that's the basics, right? You can't avoid that, right? There's no magic formula. Charisma alone doesn't win a project, right? It doesn't get it over the line. You have to do the hard yards. But the other side of it is, I think, too, is on a personal level, you have to be, there's a certain level of tenacity. You have to be driven. You have to want to see it happen. And you have to inspire the team. The team have to want to see it happen. If you go into a project with a team that are skeptical or even negative, you've lost. You have to go into a project with a team that believe as much as you do that this is possible and that you're going to do this. And then you just need to drive. And there's times you're going to have arguments, just potentially arguments. You're going to have, you're going to come across things that are, if not roadblocks, but certainly speed bumps. And you have to work through them as quickly as you can to get things back on track. Yeah.
Is there a framework that you prefer when you're running projects?
So you mean as in project management? I suppose everybody ultimately does a Prince 2 type implementation. I mean, that's it. We don't even think about it as Prince 2 anymore, but it's
more fundamentals.
Yeah. It's a fundamentals. Yeah, it's a Prince 2 type environment. When I was doing, a lot of digital development, we were doing, we were doing hundreds of deliveries a day. Sorry, hundreds of deliveries a year. We were, we were adhering to, daily stand-ups and driving as much flexibility as we could into the process, because quite often we would enter into a project without a clear understanding of how of what it's going to look like, and the business didn't have a clear understanding. So adhering to sort of agile flexibility and involving the business all the way through got us over the line. Yeah.
And going into the leadership, I know you mentioned having the right people on board. When you're going to build a team out, what do you look for in a potential hire?
It's a mixture of skill. Obviously, you have to have the skill, but very much the personality, the mix. I look for people that are probably similar to me,
Right.
that are driven, that are accountable, but people who will blend easily into the team, but also who will work well with the business. So, attitude, behaviours are as important as technical skills and capability.
Yeah. And sort of go back, we were talking earlier about sort of the business, what the business needs. Is that when you're running a project, is that your North Star? Is this going to benefit the business? Because sometimes you hear stories about people that have implemented really, really interesting tech, but whilst the tech is fantastic, it's not really fit for purpose, or it misses the mark a little bit. So,
and yeah, I've had a bit of that. I mean, I've been in business and we put technology into the market, and it hasn't exactly fired with the consumers. But at the end of the day, I see my role as implementing what the business requires, or rather, what the business wants. And success for me is to deliver that. And yeah, if I deliver great technology into the market, and the marketing people may not have got it right, and it hasn't exactly worked, that, in my mind, that doesn't detract from the fact that I've delivered a successful project.
Yeah. So you did what you set out to do.
I set out to do it, and I've done it. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think the role of a modern CIO is?
Interesting question.
Especially at this time with the changing world we're in.
Yes. First and foremost, a CIO needs to cover the basics, right? You have to build a good team. You have to provide great technology solutions for the business. You have to cover off the basics, but you have to ensure that you have a mix of technology that truly enables the business, that the business doesn't have major issues. But more than that, I think a modern CIO would sit on an executive team and be, literally part of running that business and making decisions about that business. It's even now. I'm in manufacturing rather than in QSR, and of course in QSR technology is a huge enabler. But in manufacturing, it's important as well. ERP systems, etc. We are the enablers of pretty much everything that they need to do, and we are, we're also involved in projects that involve all of the other functions and the businesses as well. So we're driving, horizontally across other functions and businesses, and we're driving hard, vertically to get new solutions in place.
Do you foresee that now, obviously with the demands of having a seat at the table and being a C-suite exec, do you think maybe like an MBA might be a good idea for people coming through, or is it more trial by fire? A degree is satisfactory, or just a really solid understanding of like common sense in the world and business?
That's a hard question. Obviously, I don't have an MBA. I have a bachelor's degree. I've never even considered doing an MBA. And I'm still quite technical. I'm still doing actual hands-on development in the role I'm in today as a CTO. In fact, I'm the only one in my team who is a developer. I've got strong infrastructure people and strong ERP people, but I'm the only one that actually has a development background. So I'm still doing that. I think it's one thing to have an MBA, and yes, that would be useful for the business side of the role. But I think at the end of the day, you also have to be a technologist. That's your job. Your job is to be a technologist. it's like a CFO. A CFO can have an MBA and be a great business person, but they do have to understand the fundamentals of accounting. They have to be, ultimately they're the last stop, right? If there's an accounting question, they've got to, and other people won't make the call or can't make the call, they've got to make the call. They've got to understand their subject matter. And to be a successful CEO and a CTO, you still need to be technical. You don't need to be hands-on technical, but you need to have a strong understanding of technology. And you have to understand where that technology is going and what it can do for your business. I think, I've met CIOs that readily admit that they're not technical anymore. But sometimes I think they sort of go too far. They've gotten so far away from the technology and so totally focused on the business and the people side of running that, I don't think they're as effective. And they're the sort that end up spending a fortune with consultants, etc.
Vendors, yeah.
Vendors,
Yep.
because they don't understand technology enough to have an opinion.
On the Westech podcast, we sit down with IT leaders who are doing great things and learn about their journey to help you on yours. Remember to like, share and subscribe.
Check the Westech podcast.
It's funny because it is such a moving and evolving space. It's very fluid, and it's funny, the MBA thing's only probably come up in the last sort of 5-10 years that, oh, okay, well, what is the right qualification? Because it is, all the better businesses do need to have a CTO at the table. Like, they can't necessarily be a lights on person anymore if the business has any sort of change agenda. So, so how do you select and where do you get good people from, and how do you know that they're going to be able to deliver? I think there's so many different areas that you can come from.
I think, the only people I've met really who are CIOs, CTOs with MBA tend to work in the large companies.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
They work in government.
Yep.
They work in, for very, very large Australian companies, insurance, banking. And, those guys probably aren't technical. It's been a long time since they were technical. Some of them were never technical. Some of them have come through other functions, through accounting or...
Yeah, which again blows my mind.
Whatever.
Right? Like...
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so common. You do hear people coming from not uncommon to come from accounting or marketing and be really successful and do really well. So there's no one sort of blueprint to come.
And those large companies can afford the consultants, right? They're $5 million project is nothing, 10 million. Whereas I tend to work for companies where, there's always retail is traditionally about, being as cost effective as you can. And it's the same where I am now. I'm in a large company, but at the same time, I've got to be, mindful and cost effective as I can be. So, we run small teams. We try to avoid spending large amounts of money with consultants unless it makes perfect sense. It's a very, specific area that you want certain expertise. So I live or die by my understanding of technology and what technology can do, and making sensible decisions.
And you have a genuine interest in it as well, obviously.
Yeah, I've always it's all I've ever done, right?
Yeah.
It's basically since uni. It's my 30 plus years of nothing but IT, technology.
What was your first computer?
Oh, I built one. Yeah, I built a 286.
Well, I was going to ask, how often did you pull it apart? So that's the next question.
I mean, that's what you did in those days, right? You sort of, you'd buy parts from the local sort of cheap. No, I think I went. There was a little shop near Central Station, and that was run by some Asian people there that were getting the parts directly from Asia, from Taiwan. So you go there, because you'd get a motherboard, and then you'd have a memory card, you'd have a video card, you'd have a hard drive, everything was an add-on card. And so, I built a 286 and ran Unix.
Oh, there you go.
I built a 286 and ran Unix on it.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean that's what we did in those days. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that I think that's a common thread that the people that have interest. That's how you sort of forge your career. And you're right from a technical standpoint. It doesn't get much more than building your own, really, is it? In terms of understanding.
Yeah, I mean we were true enthusiasts, right? You know, I used to buy, Byte magazine religiously.
Yeah, right.
And read that. I mean, I didn't exactly get into overclocking, but friends of mine were heavily into overclocking.
Right. What's that? I've never heard of that.
That's when you set up a PC and drive the processor well beyond what the specifications say it can be driven overclocking. So
That's like the equivalent of getting a car and putting a
turbocharged. Yeah. And so I had friends who were in that, but we were computer enthusiasts.
Yeah.
So not only did I do it for a living, but it was a hobby, a strong hobby as well. It wasn't my only hobby, but it was important to me. And the 286 that I built was probably worth the same, the equivalent of the car I drove. Later on, I literally bought myself a laptop, a 386SX laptop with an amber screen, and
Yeah.
I paid like just over $4,000 for it. And that was, I got it on a good arrangement because the company I worked for, I got a discount.
Yeah.
And that was worth more than the car.
Cars that would have been cutting edge at the time. So.
Yeah, the car I drove, I'd been driving for years. I remember paying less than $4,000 for it. I paid $4,200 for this SX.
Wow.
386 SX, but I loved it.
Is it true at the time that by the time you bought something off the shelf, it was out of date? Like the technology was moving that quick?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always the way. And of course, it's different these days because everything's online, right? So you subscribe, so you're always running the latest. But in those days, yeah, you literally could buy something and be outdated.
Yeah, and I think everything is all going to SaaS in terms of owning things. Everything's it's a subscription, right? Like
cloud.
The way we watch TV or
everything.
Listen to music, and it's just into life,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I stream everything. I stream movies, music. I haven't bought CDs for years.
I don't know where you could anymore, right? Like remember HMV and all those places. Yeah, that's just gone to the owning music isn't the thing now.
Yeah, I've got a DVD player for old DVDs,
but that's more of a nostalgia thing.
Yeah. It's just because we've got a library, but yeah, everything's streaming now. I mean, that's the way we go. But yeah, back in the day, you did, you built up a 286, and the next thing you know, the 386 came out, and then the 486, and anyway.
Yeah. The other question I was going to ask, in terms of like obviously the change in things and AI being the buzz at the moment.
Yeah.
What do you think a normal business, say for example Questas, what does fully utilised AI look like in a business like Questas or something that is similar size?
Well, it's on multiple levels. So first and foremost, we use AI, for instance, on our master data management solution, right, for doing master cleansing. So master data cleansing. So and that's an AI solution that's built around Snowflake. We use Snowflake as a data warehouse, and our master data management systems exists and is a Snowflake app. And that uses AI to do all of the cleansing, all of the matching of the master data and creating the golden records. We use that. Increasingly, I mean, I ran a workshop with the sort of exec and middle level management within our organization and taught them how to build GPTs, and chat GPT. So, and encouraging them to build their own GPTs within their functions to do, administrative type functions, to do
repetitive tasks.
I'm building at the moment a workflow front end tool that'll be used extensively across all of our businesses that I'm personally building. It's a Django Python framework.
Yep.
But I've integrated AI into that solution through OpenAI, because as you're potentially doing, servicing in our case, cylinders. We do hydraulic cylinders. As you're servicing cylinders, as you're working with parts, as you're doing jobs, you're building up a huge amount of data. As you're working with customers, as you're quoting for customers, again, more and more data. So the idea with this app is that using OpenAI to get insight around exactly that through the customer management, quoting, and jobs processes. So, for instance, you open a job to work on a certain cylinder, AI will come back and tell you, how many times you've serviced this cylinder in the past, what parts were required, what parts had failed, et cetera, et cetera. So you can get all of this insight as you're creating the job, as you're building up the quote.
A really practical application.
Really practical, yeah. I mean, it's around assembling and presenting data that is helpful. So I think most developers that I know today are like me. In building anything these days, you want to integrate AI. You want to use it, and I'm talking beyond the marketing side of it. You actually want to use AI to make the solution that you're building far more far more feature rich, far more insightful for people to use.
You hear stories at the moment that AI businesses go, yeah, we've rolled out AI and it might be a chatbot.
But they have technically rolled out AI.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. You look at, we've been hearing about robots taking finance jobs for years. Oh, the AI is coming, the robots are coming. So all the transactional accounting will be wiped out, and then finance will be changed to just value add and looking forward and planning. And so there's so many, even developers, like some people are saying, well, a developer's not going to be around in 10 years. That it's
like everything, right? There's a grain of truth in all of that.
Yeah.
People ask me about AI and they say, is AI going to be the equivalent of like the PC? When I went to school, it was only in my senior year at school that we got to work on PCs. The school got a computer lab, and that was our chance, right? Only the richest kids had PCs at home when I was a kid, and I certainly didn't. But we had them at school, but only in senior years. The fact is, PCs changed the world, right? There's no doubt about it. Computing changed the world, and PCs put computing in people's hands, rather than a need to a mainframe inside a concrete bunker 5 kilometers away. All of a sudden you had it sitting on your desk. It was a huge innovator in itself. And they say to me, is AI, they liken it to the PC, the innovation of the PC. I don't. I liken it to the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
I believe that AI will fundamentally change the world as we know it. I think it will take time, but there's no doubt that many, many things that people do today for a living won't be an option in 10 years' time. That a lot of the sort of heavy lifting that we do in the workplace, a lot of the emphasis we put on people to make decisions in the future, that heavy lifting, the administrative type tasks will be done by AI. A lot of that decision making will be done by AI.
Which is data backed and factual, and
absolutely, because that is often the best decision, certainly amongst business decisions. So to your point, yes, I think a lot of administrative type accounting roles won't exist in the future. The idea of a clerical person probably won't exist. And if it does, it'll probably be offshore.
Right.
And you're right. Developers will probably harness AI to do a lot of the grunt work. And that will change. It doesn't mean that people will be unemployed. It means that it will change the options and the way that they need to look at the workplace. So the people who are doing the clerical type work, they'll need to elevate themselves and do more meaningful work. Developers will have to, instead of literally cutting code, if AI is doing a lot of that for them, then they have to then put their expertise into important things like user experience, into functionality, into architecture, into design, rather than actually just, literally sitting there cutting code. So I think it will dramatically change the landscape. I actually, out of interest, I read an article came up on social for me a few weeks back, and in China, they actually had two different AI solutions, and a panel of doctors, and they ran a couple of scenarios, symptoms past AI and the doctors. AI got it. In the end, both the panels and the AI came to the same conclusions about these symptoms, but the difference was AI did it in a matter of minutes, I think, 2 minutes, whereas the panel doctors took 13 minutes on average to decide what it was. So as AI got it right, but got it
So
much faster.
Yeah, it was all data backed. So I think that's going to put them out of business, do you think? Or are we going to Google doctors? No, they'll utilise that heavily in how they operate in terms of consensus.
Yeah, but between AI and robotics, I think you'll always need people, because AI, it can't be emotive, right? And it's very cut and dry. It's black and white.
So it's a tool.
Yeah, it's a tool.
So it's a modern.
The world isn't black and white, but I think it is an extremely useful tool set to do things with.
Wayne, going back to your career, I mean, obviously now with hindsight, is there any sliding door moments or anything you would have changed or done differently if given you time again?
It's probably only the one. Like I said, I had no grand plan with my career, and I just evaluated opportunities as they came along. And one thing I will say is, whatever that opportunity was, if it was a good opportunity, I grabbed it with both hands. And if that meant packing up and moving, I did. I've moved so many times, and I'm very lucky. My wife and I have been together 20 years. But even today, if I was offered an opportunity in Silicon Valley, and I went to her and said, "This is a great opportunity," she said, "Okay, let's go." So we've moved from Singapore to Hong Kong to Australia, back and forth between Brisbane and Sydney. So I'm very fortunate that way. But if the opportunity is good enough, I'll go for it. So that's on the plus side. Is there anything that I probably regret? When I went to Hong Kong and the role up there didn't pan out to be what I thought it was going to be, the company didn't pan out to be what I thought it was going to be, I made a conscious decision to return to Australia, and that's how I ended up at CIO of Super Retail Group. And that all went very well, because, that led to many things, including Domino's eventually. But I probably, with hindsight, probably should have returned to Singapore and stayed in Asia.
Okay. With more opportunity, more bustling economy?
Probably more opportunity. I had unique skill set, being able to be very successful in Asia. It would have made a really solid, from a family perspective, because my wife's family's there, would have made a lot of sense there. But I don't know. It's one of those things.
Well, I think it's worked out pretty well for you.
Well, the thing is, when I left Hong Kong, I had no options. And I came back and I had to literally, it's the first time ever, it was like, okay, I've got nothing on the go here. It's one or the other. We go to Singapore, because I'm a Singapore permanent resident and Australian citizen. So I go back to Singapore or Australia. I'll go back to Australia. And I came back here after 11 years away, 12 years away, and I knew nobody. It was really, really hard. I didn't know any recruiters. I didn't know
starting again
anybody. Yeah, and so who knows? One thing about it, what if I had have done that, I would have gone in a very different direction, I'm sure.
Yeah, quite potentially. But as I said, I think you've done some fantastic things, since. And my final question, and I always love, this is probably one of my favourites.
I'll have a drink.
Okay, I think you might need that. What advice would you give, whether it's life advice or career advice, what would you give advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh, while still studying at 20.
I mean, the world's in front of you. There's a lot of uncertainty. You don't know where you're going to be, or I know it's such a pivotal time in people's lives that from a career standpoint, they're at the start.
Probably the only advice I could have given myself was, don't worry, Wayne, it'll all work out. I was like anyone nervous. Am I studying the right things? Am I going to be able to carve out a career in this? Am I going to be successful? Am I going to be able to do the things I wanted to do? Will I marry and have children? All of those things.
Yeah, standard.
All of those life things, and I tended towards, I was a bit of a worrier. I would worry about things, and I'd think, oh God, so I'd get a bit anxious about it. But ultimately, if I could go back there, I'd say, hey, don't worry. And the other thing I'd tell myself was, oh, don't worry, she wasn't worth it.
I mean, that's always good advice. If you could speak yourself back then, you could say,
It's finding after an ex-girlfriend. Don't worry about it.
There's always stories with those.
It all works out.
It all works out, yeah. Wayne, I've really enjoyed this chat and what you've been able to share with us. I think I've taken a lot away from today, so I'd thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion today. If you like what you hear, please like, share and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Check the West Tech Podcast. Let's go! Yes, check the West Tech Podcast. Let's get the next guest on fast. Yes, check the West Tech Podcast. Let's get the next guest on fast.
It's a specialist recruitment that you chose the best. There's been evidence to prove it because they know the West. From the map of Parramatta, that's their home address. It's a platform where you chat about your own success. To keep a promise is a must. Speaking honest, keeping trust. Being modest, we discuss. People want it, we adjust. It's all genuine, real. Share and then feel. West Tech connects, respects ideals. You need the right team, the right piece. And we can find leads like these. We keep it timely and high speed. Keep up with IT and life's needs. So if it's candid conversation, we're to chat. Or expanded information to unpack. The brand is contemplation, it's a fact. At West Tech can tell you where it's at.
Let's go! Yes, check the West Tech Podcast. Let's get the next guest on fast. Yes, check the West Tech Podcast.